Control-Alt-Hacked is a series where we talk about video games, including hacks and data breaches. I'm Paul John Spaulding, and co-hosting with me, as always, is Sam White and Kyle Haglund. Today, we have a very special guest with us, Scott Schober, the author of Hacked Again, to talk about his history as a video game pirate. I don't know if that's an accurate description, Scott. What do you think?
Yeah, you could use that term, I guess, pirate. Back then it was called a pirate. Now it sounds kind of like, I don't know, kind of mystique to it, I guess, because we associate pirates with something else more, say. But back in the days, yeah, pirate was a kind of a cool term that you wanted to be noted by.
Well, you should have joined us today in a pirate hat and,
Yes.
some kind of sword or something. But really, Scott, this started because we had you on a podcast pretty recently. You were actually hosting it, and you had two hackers on with you that you were talking to. And you were relating to them because they had pretty notable hacks under their belt. And you were relating your past as well to it, hacking video games, hacking other things. And that kind of led to this rabbit hole that we jumped down. We ended up emailing you, and you sent us back this whole pretty wild story. So why don't you just open up and start? You used to pirate video games with your brother. Tell us about that.
Yeah, and it's kind of interesting because I feel to some degree my childhood and growing up around technology and video games and all of these things kind of molded me toward my future and my career in a backwards way. At a very young age, both my brother and I, we really got into the video game craze, and to the point where we were, I guess, beyond addicted, because we literally would stay up all night and play into the wee hours of the night. I remember many a times we'd wait till my parents would be watching TV or be going to bed, and then we would secretly crawl out across the floor, down the stairs, turn the game systems on with the volume down, and just play all night long. And sometimes they'd catch us, and we'd be in a lot of trouble. And but it was just fun. And it got to the point where we couldn't stop, and that kind of fed our need to take things to the next level. Now a little bit of maybe backstory or background that may help also is my father's a techie, and we always grew up just around electronics, computers, cameras, and everything. My father, ironically, to this day, hates games. He is not a gamer, which is the most ironic thing of the whole thing that we always joke about. I don't think he's ever played a video game in his life. Yet at one point in the 80s, in the heyday of Atari, he was recruited to be the VP of the engineering labs in New York City. So he surrounded himself by geeks and nerds and hardcore gamers. He was managing the guys that wrote the video games because he really understood software and he understood hardware. But it was kind of a peculiar time. So he was very quick to pass things off to us, be it games, cartridges, later on floppy disks. We had arcade games delivered to our house. It was just like an awesome time to grow up in it. But as we got this taste of gaming and the addiction set in, it wasn't enough. And maybe it was like a junkie or something like that. We started to say, how do we accumulate more games? And we started to play around in the early days. And again, this predates the internet, so maybe for some background, what was known as bulletin board systems. And you could use, and many of them were illegal sites basically that you could access with 300 to 2400 baud modems. And if you ever seen some of the older movies and you see the old analog telephone into the rubberized couplers, you hear it plug in and you hear the hiss noise and the bing 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 and kind of the early days and sounds of maybe AOL, what they kind of mimicked. That's kind of what we were doing. We would access these specific sites all through the DTMF tones of the telephone, and you could communicate. Most of it was text-based, ASCII text-based, but most of them had, I would call it a splash screen, or the terms they used to use back then, they were called crack intros or cracktros. And these were the initial screens that these different cracking groups actually created with some very low-res graphics that kind of introduced you when you actually dialed the number, plugged your modem in, and got access. And there were typically simple levels of credentials that you had to authenticate who you were. So we would create aliases for who we were, made up names and places and different things to basically convince the SysOp, the system operator, that you were a legitimate pirate or hacker, and they would let you into different levels. And that's kind of what happened. And we became, it was known back then kind of as a courier culture, whereas you get trusted and you would be a courier, in other words, copy or pirate games, and then you would distribute these crack games across different BBSs. And hopefully you did it with lying low enough so law enforcement couldn't catch you, and the system operators you didn't upset and get bumped. And we had many a times where they would move in and realize, we weren't really truly vetted crackers, and they would bump us off and lock us out of certain BBSs. And other ones, we fooled them enough to really gain some level of access. And one story I never forget was, we started initially, you traded games. Most of it was with floppy disks. We'd copy as many as we could on a floppy disk and stack them in a disguised package. And then I was actually mailing them internationally. And in particular, one of the people I mailed to responded in a trade, and you had some trust. There were, there's some honor among thieves, I guess. And I sent them out, and sometime later I received a package back, and my mother's like, "What is this? You got a strange package." And I don't know, it was from France or somewhere. She said, "It's kind of weird." And I opened it up excitedly, knowing that this is somebody that responded, and they sent me a whole stack of pirated games, and I quickly took that, as well as a lot of the credentials that they slipped in the package. It allowed me to access different bulletin board systems, gain access, and then distribute these pirated games across different platforms, which then again, it helped me really move up, my brother and I, up in the ranks of hacking. So it was kind of like a code of conduct that you have. And I liken a lot to what you guys talk about, and some of your guests even often, about the dark web,
Yeah.
which there's some similarities and there's some contrast there, but it reminds me of that, like a subculture in society where you have trust is built and there's a certain amount of honor and bragging rights as you move through these different levels of pirating. So as kids, exciting times, and yeah, we probably crossed the line one too many times, but I can honestly say we never had law enforcement knock on our door or catch us, because we knew enough to be dangerous, but didn't cross the line. And in all truthfulness too, we never monetized it. It wasn't a business where we were selling games. Yes, we pirated them, we stole them. Um, we stepped over the line there as far as privacy and intellectual property, so guilty, but we never took a penny for any of that, for what it's worth. That makes my conscience clear as I come full spectrum and share some of these things.
Scott, I just want to get an idea of how old you were during all this, because it sounds like it spans, I'm hearing the story, and I feel like it spans many years. I mean, can you just give us a picture of where you were in your life at this time?
Yeah, actually, I was pretty young. I was in my early or young teens, I guess. We're around 11 or 12 years old. My brother is 3 years younger than myself. So, and it's cool because we still work together. He's actually addicted to games. He really understands games, and he's a good game player to this day, which is pretty. He has every game system and every game. He still goes. I've backed off a little. I stick more with the old school classics and games that I grew up on. The Centipedes and Dig Dugs and Space Invaders. I still love them, even though I know that the gameplay and the graphics are not the same, the sound's not the same. There's something about the play that got me addicted at a young age. I was one of those kids that went to the arcade in the mall with, 100 quarters in my pocket or in a bag, and my mom would drop me off, and I'd play all day with my brother and my friends. It was that type of culture that really lures you in. And it's kind of cool because you start to actually, you get really good at the games, and you learn the secrets. You're starting to think like the programmer, the way to navigate or how to beat the game, where you can just keep going for hours. I share one short story. It was kind of funny. We attended one cybersecurity conference, and I brought my brother along. I said, "Hey, it'll be fun," because they had a 80s party at one of the local bars at the end of the day. And we walk in and our eyes lit up, and they had all the old school 80s games there.
Nice.
And he
Nice.
looks at me, he goes, we're going to have some fun. I said, oh yeah. So we're kind of eyeing it up, looking, hey, who the competitors are. And it was mostly, cocky guys with their beer in their hands, trying to show off to their girlfriends or their wives, like, look how good I am at Pac-Man and this and that. And then we walked over to the corner, and there was a Miss Pac-Man machine, which my brother loved. He got really good at that one. And these guys are all standing around talking how good they were, and they were all betting. And he's standing there, and he starts to chuckle, and one of the guys turns around and says, "What, you think you could do better?" And he goes, I don't know. I played it a few times." And he was kind of hustling him, and he goes, "All right, you want to bet $20?" He goes, yeah, okay. I got an extra 20. If I lose, what's the big deal? He destroyed everyone there, and I was cracking up just watching him. It got to the point where the muscle memory came back with the joystick, and I'll never forget the look on his face as he cleared a level. He glances over like this, and he's doing the moves and following the sound and the feel without even looking at the arcade machine. I'm like, this is pathetic. This is when you've gamed too much, you've crossed the line. And that was my brother, and he was really good at that. My game was Centipede, and later on in life, I bought a stand-up arcade machine. I still have it here in the office. And then I bought a cocktail table one, and I upgraded them and put new graphics and improved everything on it. So they're like both in mint condition there. It was more of a collectible thing, but it's just the culture, and it's just a lot of fun, the nostalgia associated with gaming. And honestly, the pirating of the games back then, I mean, we amassed, I don't want to say thousands, it was probably tens of thousands of games at one point. It was kind of embarrassing because our entire downstairs was just filled floor to ceiling with shelves with just games all organized in these, drawers. It was almost like a library system where we had it organized and you knew where to find the game. And again, these were not games that are on a hard drive. These are games on physical floppy disks, and then also on cartridges, which is yet another story.
Wait, quick question. You have a Centipede table that's playable, like the game?
Oh yeah, both of them, fully 100%
Oh,
playable. A stand-up arcade machine. It weighs a couple 100 pounds,
yeah.
and it takes coins, works, music, the whole thing. And then right across from where I'm sitting, I have a cocktail table one as well. If you've ever seen those in a bar, a sit-down glass top, and then
Oh
two
my
people
God.
play opposing one another. And some of these collectible machines, they'll get $2, $3, $4,000 based upon condition on them. So they're very desirable because think about it, when you look at something from back in the early '80s, eventually they wear out and break and fall apart. But it's a good collectible if you're into that type of stuff. I mean, I collected baseball cards as kids, and obviously pirated software games, and now video games from that era.
Well, we know where we're going, and we're in New Jersey. We're coming to your HQ.
Yes, yeah. You're
Seriously.
always welcome to come by here. It's kind of we joke around a lot of times because we have a lot of fun stuff here. My office, I've got a pool table here, and we've got a bar and refrigerator area and games and things. And people walk by and say, "What do you guys do here exactly?" And I said,
I'm taking notes. We
Yeah.
need some upgrades here.
Road trip.
Yeah.
So Scott, what happened to the 10,000 floppy disks? Do you still have them, or?
No, I don't. I wish I did. No, unfortunately, they all got disposed, as well as it's kind of a sad story. But we grew up in the town of Edison. Many people have heard of Edison because that's where the light bulb is, and there's actually a museum here and things like that. And we're right near the train station. We're there for 30 plus years. It was the house I grew up in. Eventually, when my parents retired from the family business here, and moved up North Jersey to a lake community, they sold the house in Edison. And it was kind of a sad day. I think my father basically tossed all kinds of stuff that you could fill a museum. And when I tell you stuff, I mean, again, he worked at Atari, so he would bring home the latest and greatest. It would, the Atari 400, the Atari 800, the 1500, the 5200. And it wasn't one thing. He'd bring home a half a dozen game systems and every game known to man, and controllers, but even ones that weren't even on the market yet. And we got, as young teenagers, we were induced into that. And he would say, "Hey, you want to come into the city and spend the day?" And we're like, "Yeah." We'd go in, and I never forget, they had one room. It had about 50 arcade machines that kind of went in a giant C formation. And we would basically go in there and just play. And all employees had access to this, you know, room to chill. They brought in pizza every day and beer. We couldn't drink, but we could eat all the pizza that we want and soda and play arcade games. And, when we wanted to, we did. And it was kind of cool because my father got to hang out with the likes of other people at the time, and his boss knew Steve Jobs and Bill Gates and others. So his path crossed a lot of people, and many people may or may not know of these people now, but in the 70s and 80s, these were the rock stars of the world of computers and games and things like that. And a lot of the people that my father hired eventually, when he had to let them go, and he had to let go about 175 individuals at one point, I believe, they ended up forming Activision and some of these other companies that were really the competitors of Atari. They developed really cool games that had better graphics, better sound, better gameplay. So we got kind of in the foray of the mixture of playing these games. But then at one point, they approached us and said, "You guys are really enjoying these games. Would you like to be, testers for these games?" And we're like, "Well, what's that involved?" And they're like, "No, we give you the early copies of the games, and you're not allowed to copy these and pirate it," because they knew that we did certain
Uh-oh.
things that we shouldn't. But if you take them home and keep them under your roof, you can test them, and you take a notebook and basically write down if you ever discover a bug or a problem with the games. And sometimes on level 34, if you move, like I remember on Dig Dug extensively, we spent a lot of time when that game was being developed, push the joystick down and to the right and press the button on the 34th screen, then this wacky thing would happen. And what we started to learn too, and when you really get into games to the point where you play them too much, most of the people hid things in there. And sometimes there were messages, sometimes they were secrets, they were codes for how to solve different levels and things. So we started to amass a lot of secretive information, and sometimes we'd feed that back to the programmer. Sometimes we squirreled it away for our own knowledge for later on to use to our advantage to basically solve some of these games. And it was just a lot of fun, that type of culture. What did happen was in the early days when we were using really the Atari 2600 and a little bit later the 5200, if you remember, those were hard cartridges that you stuck in, as opposed to later on computer systems, the 400, the 800, so on and so forth, or the Apples and the Commodores. A lot of those had shifted to floppy disks. Most of them were, I think it was 3.5 inch and 5.25 inch floppy disks initially, but there were physical cartridges, and what they had on those were EEPROMs, and they were programmable. So you could actually program the ROM inside the cartridge. And we were frustrated because we wanted to find a way to pirate and copy these games without having to go to the store and drop $20 to buy a game. Back then, that was pretty expensive. So we talked to our father, and he kind of said, "Well, let me see what I could do. I'll slip you some hardware." And we ripped apart a 2600, and we got an EEPROM blower, and we hardwired it together with a power supply. And I remember it was a little piece of plywood we cut in the garage and mounted this all on standoffs and wired it up, and he helped us. And we developed basically it was really an EEPROM ripper, so we could steal games. You'd put on one side a cartridge that would read. You'd plug it in, a green light would light. You'd stick in the cartridge on the other side, which was a blank EEPROM, and then we'd hit a switch, and then it would take a while, but it would copy the contents of one EEPROM to the blank EEPROM, and then the red light lit up, and we'd pull it out. And he would come home, and he'd bring us boxes of blank cartridges with blank EEPROMs on them. So we'd have the plastic housings. The only thing, it didn't have a label on it. So it didn't say Dig Dug or Frogger or ET or anything like that. So we would just take a white, Avery label and write on there Frogger or this or that. So we'd play games and trade with our friends, and they'd be like, "All your games have got like these cheesy, like handwritten notes on them. What are you guys doing? What, your labels all fall off? Did they get wet? What happened?" And we're just like, "Oh no, I don't know. It's cheap game cartridges." And what we would do is we'd lend them a game, and then they would lend us maybe the game they just bought that just came out. We'd take it home, we'd rip it off, copy it, and next thing you know, we just amassed the cartridges just like we did with all the floppies. So we just pretty much, the goal in life was copy every game known to man, and I think we succeeded at one point there. When you tested, they'd have a party, they'd launch it at Atari, you know, pizza and beer, and we'd be invited in as kids because we helped test it a little bit, and we get a certificate, get a picture, and they would give us a physical cartridge, and then they would actually sign it. So I remember E.T. in particular. It was a terrible game, but when that game came out on Atari, the actual coders all signed the games, and there were some unwritten rules that happened most people don't know about. With Atari, there wasn't really stardom as far as the software engineers. They got paid a lot of money, and they got some good bonuses and things like that, so they were generous, but they did not get any rights as far as their names, as far as the developers behind the game, which was kind of difficult because some software programmers had some strong egos and wanted to be known and build up a rapport and say, hey, I was, one of the key guys on the team, maybe 10 people that wrote Dig Dug over a period of time. They got paid a lot of money, got their bonuses and stuff, but it always said Atari. It never said the software developers that put the blood, sweat, and tears on it. So many of those disgruntled employees, as Atari kind of heyday and then it started its demise, those are the ones that went to Activision. And it's interesting, if you look at Activision and some of the other competing companies, their names were dominant. They were mentioned in a lot of the credits and on the box and things like that. So that helped them to grow in their career of developing games. It was a really cool time.
Scott, I was curious, like when did it stop? Because it seemed like you kept amassing this giant collection of games and pirating. Like it seemed like a snowball. Like when did this all stop?
For us, a lot of it stopped on the Atari side about the mid 80s because Atari just crashed. Atari was in its heyday. A lot of the games that came out, the initial games were 1980, 81, 82. Then about 83, 84, boom, it collapsed and they lost a lot of good employees and they kind of imploded. And for us, that's when our tie to Atari stopped. And my father actually, he kind of retired from that in a sense. I'll never forget, he came home one day and he was kind of disappointed, but he shared, and he sat down and shared the story, and it's out on the internet and YouTube, and you can kind of check it out. What was kind of cool was the short of it. They produced so many games at one point, and there was a kind of a commissioner bonus for the different stores that sold the games. So what happened is the Atari salesman would go in and say, hey, take 40 copies of Pac-Man and take 50 copies of Centipede and Missile Command, this and that, and they would push it. And he's, don't worry, if you sell it, you can always return it and get a credit. Well, at that time, you had a lot of these other competing companies, the Commodore and other gaming systems that were out there that came out with better games, better graphics, better sound, better gameplay. And then they would go in there and they say, hey, we got no room. We got all these Atari games. They said, don't worry, just start sending them back. Well, this happened across the board. And suddenly, hundreds of thousands of cartridges that weren't selling in that year, that 83, 84 time frame, started coming back, and they didn't know what to do with them. They panicked, Atari, and they weren't producing enough good games. And what ended up happening is they dug a big hole somewhere and buried them all. And supposedly there's a show, I think, that I saw that they actually dug them up and found the cartridges and claim it's not just a myth but a true story, and how many millions of cartridges that they buried. Well, that was their downfall, and they went down as fast as they rose. But I remember him coming home. He had a giant yellow Pac-Man rug in his office and things like that. He had that he brought in, and unfortunately Atari said, look, you're not allowed to work for anybody else. So they basically paid him not to work for a year, and it drove him insane not to work in that industry. And finally, the only way he could break his contract would be at a loss for things. So he kind of had to wait it out. And as kids, though, it was great because your dad's home and we're playing games and we're going to the beach and spent
Yeah.
the summer with him. He's not working. It was just a cool time. But we transferred from that, to answer your question, over to really copying Apple games and shifting more to the floppy disks. And I mean, as kids, my brother and I and my father, we really went to every week we went to an Apple Computer Club. It was held at Rutgers. And I remember when we first went, it was only like 6 people that went. After a couple years of going, there'd be 40, 50 people. So it really started getting popular. And there was a lot of influence in things we learned. And they talked about how to develop software, A lot of it was copying things, how to get around some of the copy protections. And we really started to get into that when we got into the world of Apple II and the piracy. And again, that was into the 80s on into the early 90s, I would say. Disk nibblers, which was kind of a bit by bit duplicators, and there was different types of ways you could do sector editing to get around the copy protection that was put on these things. And again, refocusing our efforts to get into the worlds of cracking tools and things. And these were applications and methods that you use to get around any type of protection. And that was kind of the fun thing. You learned a lot of that at the computer clubs, because these are other just guys that, goofed around and did things. It's kind of ironic and a little embarrassing. One of my father's close friends that used to go with us to the computer club, I still know him to this day, and I stop by his house every once in a while, and I bring old computers. If I ever come across an old computer or something like that, he has his entire house of collectibles, and he donates them to museums, and he configures them and sets them up, and to kind of keep the history going about what's evolved in computers and things. So he's a wealth of knowledge, and I always talk to him and my father as well about the good old days and what we did. But by those, probably by the late 80s or so, the copying and the methods and things changed a lot, and we kind of got out of that scene, because it got to that point where there was a lot more protection that was put into the games, and encryption started to come out. It got really difficult to do what we were doing, and those days kind of went by. Not that people still don't copy things, but it actually changed, and it's ironic because at that time period, the late 80s, we were actually hired to develop a hardware key to protect a company that produced these expensive accounting packages. If you remember back in those days, some of the software packages that went into a company would be $10,000, which was a lot of money back in those days. And we developed a little hardware device, and it had a 2-foot cord that came out, and we had it coded. So when you started up, it went out, actually the parallel port back in that day, looked for a secret code that we embedded in there, and that would activate the software. So you could sell 100 copies of software, but it only worked with this, we called it a passport, this passport hardware key that we developed. We actually produced over 40,000 of them. It was one of our highest produced security products. And that was back in the old days of the late 80s, and that company just took off like a rocket, because at the time they were the only one that had a true hardware encrypted external device, as opposed to the common protection standards that most software companies embedded in there, and codes and other things that, everybody eventually learns how to hack things and get through things. It's not that hard. I mean, I was actually doing work yesterday with one of the engineers trying to turn on a credit card terminal for some of the work we're doing. And he said, "Scott, there's no way in this." He goes, "It's password protected. There's a 10-digit code on this." And I said, "Give me a half hour." I came back, I found the code, opened it, and he went like this. It's like, I don't believe it. I don't want to ask how you just got into that. And the terminal one of them happens to be Bed Bath and Beyond terminal that we were able to get, and we access it and look, and you guess what you see on there, of course, a database of people's credit cards and CVV and all the information. That's another story. We didn't use any of it or anything. I cleared the memory and wiped it, but for research purposes only. But it's easy. Even this day, decades later, it's not that hard to compromise passwords, because humans are the problem. It always goes back to humans and social engineering, and we overshare information, and it's out there, be it the dark web, the surface web. It can be found one way or another.
I mean, I think it's so interesting to us because on this series, we've had guests on who maybe have a similar story to you. They got into video games, and that kind of sparked this hardware, software interest in technology. And then through the years, it led them to cybersecurity. I mean, is video games a good way in, even today, into the technology field when it comes to hardware and software, cybersecurity as well, and the stuff that you're doing too?
Absolutely. And it's kind of embarrassing. I've interviewed people to hire them for a job here, and they say, "Oh, Scott, I've got a degree in computer science, and I got this certification in cybersecurity and this business degree, all these different skill sets they have from colleges or online schools, whatever. And I said, oh, that's all wonderful. Great. Okay. I said, what's your hobby? And they're like, what? Oh, I like ice skating, or I like this or that. And I was like, okay, what about technology? And when they tell me they like to play games, like technology, they like electronics, they like to fiddle with things, take them apart, it gets my attention. That tells me that's a good employee because they've got curiosity. They want to know what makes things tick. They want to know how to break things, maybe fix things, how to find back doors to things. Those are all nice hands-on skill sets for somebody that wants to get into the field of cybersecurity. And there's lots of different areas. It could be digital forensics. It could be somebody that's a penetration tester or somebody that's performing vulnerability assessments. Whatever it is, those skill sets can be used in different disciplines, be it financial and Fortune 500 companies, data and servers, keeping that secure. There's so many different aspects, but fundamentally, it all goes back to your curiosity and skill set. When I talk to you guys, and I've had conversations with all of you, I get excited because you guys understand audio. You understand video. It excites you. It gets a smile on your face. That tells me it's your hobby. Oh, and it's also your career. That's somebody that's very skilled in a niche area. And the same is true, I think, in the world of cybersecurity. And gaming, to me, is one of the best things. Some of the people that I've connected with, I notice a commonality. I remember never forgetting, go back a number of years to a security show, cybersecurity show. I was down in Virginia, and I was excited because I was hired, I'm paid to get up on stage and speak, and I look who the keynote speaker is, and it was Kevin Mitnick. And I was like, oh, this is great. He's like an idol of mine. I love it because he's, social engineering, but he also knows hardware and software. He's a hacker. He's a phone freak. He's got some of the history to them back in the early 90s, which paralleled a lot of the stuff that I did. And then getting there, he walks up to me and he introduces himself. And I was kind of like astounded, and he asked for a copy of my book if I'd sign it. And I'm like, I'm honored. And then he pulls out of his bag his book and signs it for me. And we started chatting. And he was like, hey, good luck up on stage there. I'm also speaking. And I'm like, wow, this is awesome. Next thing I know, he gives his presentation. I give mine. Later on, they had a little after party, and we were at the local bar there. And I'm sitting at the bar. Guess who walks up next to me? He puts his arm around me and he's like, Scott, man, great presentation. I loved
Oh my
it.
gosh.
Can I
Yeah.
sit down with you? And I'm like, yeah. We sat down and had a couple beers. We talked for, I think, 3 hours. And I just said, what a cool guy. I mean, I've heard good and bad about him. People are critical. People say all kinds of things, but he's a good guy. He did unfortunately pass tragically, but I learned a lot of things from him just in those 3 hours, and obviously reading his books and following him as a social engineer and understanding hardware and how to find weaknesses and vulnerabilities of things. That excites me. That's the kind of level of hobbyist I think that he was as a the world's most famous hacker that I always said I aspired to be. Maybe not to the same degree where I focus just solely on hacking. I'm focusing on designing and building tools that keep people safe from wireless threats and cyber threats. So slightly different focus because we're selling products. But really, it's the juice that makes you excited and flow. All comes from the hobby side. You read geek magazines, you go on the internet and you study vulnerabilities and breaches and things and how to find workarounds and things. Those are the things that make you tick, I think, in the world of hacking and cybersecurity, whether you're a white hat, a black hat, a hobbyist, working for a large security firm. You need that underlying thing to really get your juices flowing, I think, to be successful at it and stay at it over the years.
Honestly, I think that's one of my favorite things about this podcast is all these people that started off just playing games. I mean, we've interviewed a couple CISOs that got their start in just playing games. And we've also interviewed some black hat hackers that are also just, they started playing games and it just evolved. And it's just so interesting to think like 10, 20 years ago, you'd almost, not almost, but you'd probably get like made fun of for playing games too much. And now people have built entire careers out of just starting off playing games, which is, I don't know, it's like, I don't know if this word is too far-fetched, but it's like inspirational. Like,
Hmm.
not just for me, but for like, a kid that listens and is like, I play Fortnite. Like this could be like a future. Like, I don't know. I just find that so cool that a hobby, just an everyday hobby that, I mean, so much of the world does, can really turn into this lifelong career that you really love. It's so cool. And it sounds like that's what happened to you. Like, I mean,
Yeah.
how cool is that your dad worked at Atari and at 12 years old you were testing video games? That's like unheard of.
Oh,
Like, that's
yeah.
you were living the dream. That is just so cool.
Yeah. And it's funny how too it resonates with certain people game playing and other people it doesn't. I'll share a funny story. We joke about this all the time. My grandparents would always visit us in Edison growing up as kids, and I had all my friends over downstairs. And I remember when Space Invaders first came out, and my grandparents walked downstairs and they're looking, they're like, "What is that?" And I'm like, "It's a game, Grandma. You gotta try it. It's called Space Invaders. It's so much fun. It's on Atari and da da da." And she goes, "Okay, let me try. Tell me what to do. What's this black thing?" And it's the old Atari 2600 joystick at the time. We handed to her, explain, here's the orange button. Here's how you control a joystick. You got to shoot the invader. So you're kind of explaining something for somebody that's 2 generations back, and it didn't exactly resonate at first. She gets on and starts to play, and I remember she hit the button and she shot one of the Space Invaders and got 5 points, and she's like, "This is great. I love this. This is so much fun." And then she got killed, lost all 3 of her lives, and it was game over. She got 5 points on Space Invaders. And I'll never forget, she walked away. She said, "Thanks, Scotty. That was great. I'm going to buy one of these Ataris." She goes up the stairs, and my friend looks over at me. She goes, "Your grandma sucks at Space Invaders." And to this day, we always laugh about it. And it's ironic because then, of course, my father had to go get my grandparents an Atari system and all the games. So we'd visit them and we'd play games and for hours at my grandparents' house. So it was a nice kind of thing that bonded us too, I think. You have stories and you have a creative side, I think, to your point there, Kyle, that comes out. I'm not an artist. I can't draw. I don't have necessarily a great eye for photography or audio or things like. I know enough to be dangerous, but I understand the creative side maybe from software development or gaming because I grew up as that. I mean, my degree is in computer science and I learned how to program and stuff. So I was pounding the keyboard, listening to 80s music when I learned how to program, and I took courses and then went to college and got a degree and so on and so forth for it. So, but the creativity comes out in a technical way. And some people, it comes out in a paintbrush or something else, or maybe the way they speak or some ability to write and things like that. I've had to learn how to do different creative things because it doesn't, reside in me, but it always kind of came more natural from a technical side. I gravitated toward that, the ones and zeros and wires and soldering and kind of skunk work things. And I think a lot of it because in our house, my father had a little 10 by 10 lab, and he would go in there in the wee hours of the night and he would solder, and he would have a meter and oscilloscope and a spectrum analyzer later on. And he would show me things and it would kind of get you excited. This is mysterious. Nobody outside these walls, the average person, doesn't touch these things or play with these things. So I think for me, it kind of just naturally set the foundation for what I'm still doing today, the soldering and coding and playing games and hacking. It all complemented my childhood. And everybody who doesn't have a great, if you have a great childhood, you want to relive those years again and again. You want to recreate that nostalgia and that feeling. If it's something from riding your bike to playing an adventure game and chase outside as a kid, we did things like that, played in the dirt and lit fires in the fields. We did things we probably shouldn't have done. I shouldn't talk about, but I have a lot of those type of memories that makes me feel good inside. And at the heart of all of them, they usually go back and revolve around gaming, I guess I should say.
It's wonderful. I mean, I think maybe we have to have another podcast, invite you and your brother, Craig, right?
Sure, yeah.
On as well, because it's just such a fun thing to talk about, learn about. I mean, Scott, I think of you every time I walk into a stadium or past a security gate, because I know you've developed a lot of those machines that recognize devices in people's pockets or certain electronics and things like that. Or every time I am about to put my card in a terminal at a store, I'm like, uh-oh, okay, Scott would not necessarily approve of this.
Hold up a second.
Right at a gas
the
station.
same thing.
Yeah,
That's
you
so
do.
funny. I swear, every time I think of you, Scott, when I use my credit card.
Yeah, I'm like, I don't know. Let me use tap to pay. I don't know if that's actually that
Yes.
much safer, but
Yeah, it is safer. Yeah,
Okay, good.
there are levels. I won't go into a tangent, but use tap to pay. Safer than tap to pay or chip and pin is Google Wallet or Apple Pay. That's at the top of the list, the safest. Yeah, so gravitate toward that wherever you can, because that's that's solid. It's safe, and you won't be compromised.
Well, Scott, we are running a bit long on time here, but this has been absolutely wonderful. So please join us anytime on Control Attacked. We'd love to keep talking to you.
Thank you for hopping on with us, Scott. This story is awesome.
Nice to be with you. Thanks.